Good afternoon. Before I start, can I just make a very short statement? Last night I responded to a point of order from Lewis MacDonald in relation to the Scottish Government's handling of parliamentary questions. I commented that as a matter of general courtesy and respect for the Parliament, the content of any points of order should not be circulated to the press in advance of it being raised first in the Chamber. I met earlier today with Ms MacDonald, who assured me that neither he nor anyone acting on his behalf had circulated any such information in relation to the specific point of order raised yesterday. There was absolutely no intention on my part to infer that Mr MacDonald had released such information, and I therefore have no hesitation in accepting Mr MacDonald's assurance. Finally, on the wider issue, I attach great importance to the use of parliamentary questions as a means of holding the Government to account, and I remind ministers that I expect questions from members to be dealt with in a fair and transparent way. Right, we now move to question time. The Justice and Law Officer's question number 1 from Mark Griffin has been withdrawn. I have an explanation from Mr Griffin that I am satisfied with. Question number 2, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on prisoners being issued with contracts for father and child visits.
Cabinet Secretary Cain McCaskill.
As with all questions regarding the operation of the Scottish Prison Service, I have asked Colin McConnell, the Chief Executive, to consider this question, and he has advised the following. When offenders ask for bonding visits, they are advised of the provisions which will be applied. The offender is asked to sign a form acknowledging that they understand the process. This is not a contract.
Mary Fee.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. I have here a copy of a contract used in Shotts Prison and given to prisoners which clearly states that father and child visits are a privilege and not a right. This is in direct contravention of Article 9 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Through PQs answered in April and June, the previous and current SPS Chief Execs have given conflicting statements on whether these visits are a right or a privilege. In September, I received a letter from the current Chief Exec stating the reverse of what he told me in June. Can the Cabinet Secretary clarify exactly what is going on in Scottish prisons?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think what I can do is clarify exactly what Mr McConnell said to Mary Fee. The contract she refers to, I understand, relates to HM Prison Shotts. The use of the word contract is misleading and is a colloquial expression used in HM Prison Shotts only whereby visitors are asked to agree to abide by various criteria to allow them to participate in the scheme. I understand that Ms Fee wrote to Colin McConnell, the Chief Executive, regarding this issue in September. He replied on 27 September 2012, advising that it was entirely incorrect that parent and child visits, or indeed any visits, should be removed as a punishment, and had been advised in this case. It's quite clear, and it's central to this revised guidance, will be given that the rights of the child are paramount, and recognising prisoners' rights under ECHR to live a family, to have a family life. The criteria for accessing the scheme will be presumed inclusion, having regard to any child protection issues as part of the relationship policy. And for the avoidance of doubt, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Prison Service has very recently reminded governors that removal from bonding visits should not be used as a punishment. In these circumstances, given the assurance given by Mr McConnell to Mary Fee, given the record that he has sent to governors, and given my assurances on behalf of the Chief Executive of the Scottish Prison Service, I would hope that Ms Fee would accept that.
Question number 3 from Michael McMahon has been withdrawn. I do have an explanation for which I am satisfied. Question number 4, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will continue to address gun crime in the light of the 50% reduction in firearms offences over the last 5 years.
Cabinet Secretary.
The latest figures are encouraging, but there are still too many offences in Scotland involving a firearm. This is why we will be creating a licensing system for air weapons. I will continue to press the Home Office to devolve legislative powers on all firearms to the Scottish Parliament. Discussions will also continue with the police and gun lobby, as well as other stakeholders, to ensure that we can make our communities safer.
Bob Johnson.
Thanks, President Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? Yes, it is welcome progress, but we do indeed have to go further. And I note that 38% of all firearm offences for 11-12 did actually involve air weapons, particularly prevalent is the campaign for restrictions of air weapons since the murder of Andrew Morton in Glasgow region in 2005. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what additional information he can give us into the timing of any consultation to restrict the use of air rifles within Scotland now that these powers are actually contained within the Scotland Act?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for asking that particular matter. I did establish a Scottish Firearms Consultative Panel in November 2011, which has been examining the practicalities of licensing air weapons, which I consider is the best way to combat the misuse of air weapons, and it is indeed a manifesto commitment of the SNP that forms the government. It's also a matter that was raised with myself personally by Andrew Morton and Sharon McMillan, who tragically lost their young son, and we have given a commitment to them that action will be taken to ensure that no more tragedies occur, and indeed address the other difficulties that also happen with the misuse of air weapons, whether relating to children, animals or indeed other aspects. And on that basis, I can confirm to Mr Doris a consultation on the proposals will be launched on Friday.
Alex Johnson.
Can I ask the Minister if you could tell me what proportion of gun crime is currently carried out with weapons that are legally held and properly registered, and if that figure would underpin my view that current firearms legislation is fit for purpose?
Well, I don't think that the current firearms legislation is fit for purpose. All the investigations that we have done with experts, with the police and indeed with the police south of the border, there's a recognition that the firearms legislation is difficult to understand. There's something, as I recall, of something in the region of 8 Acts of Parliament that make it up, together with some 7 significant amendments, some of which appear to be mutually contradictory. So there is a desire for an overarching review to have a consolidation of firearms legislation. We would wish to do that. Action has so far not been taken by the Home Secretary. It's quite clear that many of the worst problems that we are faced with in our communities do come in terms of weapons that are used illegally, that are clearly not used by those who would seek to use weapons in a more responsible manner. But we have to deal with two matters. The forces of law enforcement will address those who deal with matters illegally and who seek to perpetrate crimes, serious or otherwise. We do have a significant problem in Scotland with air weapons. We have a commitment that we stood upon to address that. It is a matter that I've also commented on and give assurances to the parents of young Andrew Morton, and we will seek to deliver that. There are clear differences between the abuse in terms of difficulties that occur in our communities and indeed some of the more significant matters, but both of those behaviours are unacceptable, and we do as a government seek to take action. There's only one particular aspect that we can address at the moment. Address it we will, and I do continue to urge the Home Secretary to either take action or give us the powers to allow us to take action to make sure that we get a comprehensive, credible legislation fit for the 21st century.
Question 5, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to promote the use of community service orders.
Cabinet Secretary.
We have improved community sentences. We introduced a new community payback order last year, giving our judiciary the option to impose a clearer, tougher, more flexible and more effective sentence in the community disposal that replaced. This has been backed up with additional funding, giving local authorities £4 million to support the unpaid work element of the CPO. We've implemented new targets for starting and completing unpaid work and funded the fast-track pilot in Glasgow, which resulted in over 90% of offenders in Glasgow starting unpaid work within 24 hours of being sentenced. We've created a new law which gives communities a say in the type of unpaid work they want us to see offenders do. Collectively, these measures demonstrate that we're committed to following an approach which is effective community sentences at its heart.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that I've raised the issue of community service orders on a number of occasions, both inside and outside of the Parliament, in relation to allowing those serving a CSO to undertake the work to alleviate flooding conditions throughout the west of Scotland. Therefore, will the Cabinet Secretary make me aware of what action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that community service orders are being undertaken within the west of Scotland? Will they consider once again encouraging the use of CSOs to assist with inclement weather conditions over this winter?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we certainly do encourage that. I have seen that matters such as snow clearing myself, whether in the west of Scotland, the east of Scotland, or indeed elsewhere. I'm aware of the particular matter raised by Mr Macmillan, and we are perfectly comfortable that that is the type of work that can be carried out, so long as there's no danger to the health and safety of all those involved, whether doing a sentence or indeed supervising them. It's a matter that we leave to the local authorities, who are the body capable and indeed charged with dealing with it. We do put in additional funding, whether through proceeds of crime money or additional base support that we've given to them. So I would hope and suggest perhaps that Mr Macmillan may care to speak to the local community payback teams to see what work can be carried out, to give the suggestions, because certainly my experience, whether in the east of Scotland or elsewhere, is where communities make suggestions of what they want done. Certainly the community payback teams are very keen to ensure that they, wherever possible, do that, whether it's clearing snow, whether it's addressing difficulties in graveyards, or indeed sometimes just litter picking. This is about making those who have damaged our community do some hard work to atone for their difficulties and make our communities better places.
Graham Pearson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, you may know that last year the numbers of community service orders 2010-11 stood at 5,940. Of that number, a third were breached, 1,932. And the levels of community service orders are exactly the same as 2006-07. What steps will the Cabinet Secretary take to ensure that these orders are properly enforced and that they're not seen as a soft option in the public eye?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, they're not seen as a soft option. The enforcement has to come through the Shrieval bench, or indeed whatever other bench that imposes it, but normally it would be the Shrieval bench. It would be fair to say that sometimes breaches can be for very minor matters and do result in simply the court remitting it back, although usually making it quite clear the basis upon which it has to be done. From discussions with the Shrieval bench and the Sheriffs Association, I know sometimes that individual offenders can cause great frustrations to them, and that's why as a government we are quite clear. A community payback is not optional, it is obligatory. If it's imposed by the court, then it is meant to be done. If it is not done, then the court has the fail-safe and will have our full support wherever it's felt necessary in simply remitting people to a custodial sentence. But we do believe that the good work and cooperation and where we have the best results is usually where there's close cooperation between the community payback team and the Shrieval bench, where they work together and indeed successfully make sure that people do their work and our communities are improved.
Question 6, Roger Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Notwithstanding the answer given to Bob Doris earlier, to ask the Scottish Government when it will introduce its consultation on the licensing of air weapons.
Cabinet Secretary.
As indicated to Bob Doris, we will begin the consultation on Friday.
Roger Campbell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Can he advise who participated on the Scottish Firearms Consultative Panel and what contribution was made by them?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I welcomed all the contributions. Those that sat on the panel were the Police, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, the Scottish Target Shooting Federation, the Gun Trade Association, the British Shooting Sports Council, the Scottish Air Rifle and Pistol Association, the Gun Control Network, the Scottish Community Safety Network, the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities and the Scottish Government. I was grateful for all the input that came in, many from a very expert basis. Sometimes there were clearly some disagreements around the table, but I do thank each and every person who contributed for the efforts that they made.
It's not possible to accept interventions during questions. Question number 7, Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And may I also thank you for your gracious comments at the beginning of this session regarding or following my point of order that I raised with you yesterday afternoon. Can I ask the Scottish Government how many fiscal direct penalties have been discharged without having been fully paid since 2009?
Secretary.
Overall, fine collection rates are at their highest ever, and the Scottish Court Service is taking a robust approach to pursuing all outstanding fines. This gives a clear message to defaulters that there is no place to hide. Recent figures published by Scottish Court Service show that there have been 17,202 fiscal direct penalties discharged since 2009-10. The figures show that currently 6,694 penalties imposed in 2009-10 have been discharged, with a further 5,756 and 4,752 in the last 2 years. It is often the case that a discharge is linked to an alternative punishment, such as a supervised attendance order. All decisions on discharges are taken by a court in light of the facts and circumstances of the case.
Mr MacDonald.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that many such alternative disposals do not apply in the case of fiscal direct penalties, and indeed the report on page 2 of the quarterly fines report from the Scottish Court Service does list direct penalties paid for each fiscal direct penalties paid for each financial year since 2009. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the percentages reported in this official statistics publication for Scotland have been calculated only after discounting the 17,000 fiscal penalties which were discharged over that period, thereby giving an entirely false impression of the success rate in collection of fiscal fines? And on that basis, will he confirm that less than half of the fiscal direct penalties imposed on offenders since 2009 have been paid in full? And if so, does he agree that urgent action is needed to put that right?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the appropriate action is being taken by the Scottish Court Service. They've laid down in their report the basis upon which the calculations are made, and as indicated, 78% imposed in 2009-10 have either been paid or are on track to be paid. Clearly, though, there is more work to be done. There are further powers that we would welcome, and indeed it may be that Mr MacDonald would wish to join with me in encouraging the UK Government once again to give the Scottish Court Service and ourselves the ability to access matters through the Department of Work and Pensions. That would make the collection of matters so much easier, but so far we have been refused that power by the UK Government. If only these matters were either devolved here or dealt with by them, then I am sure what Mr MacDonald is seeking to achieve would be so much easier for those who do an outstanding job seeking to collect it within the current limited powers.
Question number 8 from John Penton has been withdrawn. I have an explanation provided, which I am satisfied with. Question number 9, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the impact of court closures, as proposed by the Scottish Court Service in its consultation shaping Scotland's court service, will be on Ayr Sheriff Court.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Court Service consultation document proposes that Ayr Sheriff and Justice of the Peace Court would continue to hear local, civil, summary and sheriff and jury cases.
John Scott.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, but he will be aware that the Scottish Court Service has proposed the closure of a number of courts near my constituency, including Kirkcudbright Sheriff Court and Rothesay Sheriff Court, as well as Justice of the Peace Courts in Irvine and Kilmarnock. And this will mean that those courts that remain, including Ayr Sheriff Court, will have to hear an extra 276 criminal cases a year or thereby. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concern that these proposals will place great strain on our already busy courts, could lead to trials being delayed and may also risk access to justice?
Well, I think the member is right to raise what would be the potential impact upon Ayr Sheriff Court, as clearly there is no variation to the work that they do. Clearly, though, Kirkcudbright sits on a very limited basis and the number of cases there are very restricted. There is also the possibility that they might go to Dumfries or other matters. What I can give the member the assurance is that the Scottish Court Service have looked clearly at matters because they do not wish to ensure that matters would be damaged or jeopardised at Ayr. But I would encourage him to speak with the Scottish Court Service if he has concerns on that, because it's certainly my understanding that they have looked at matters, are certain that Ayr has the capacity to cope, but I am sure they would be delighted to engage with them.
Question number 10, Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the Law Society of Scotland about reform of time bar.
Minister Rosanna Cunningham.
As part of a period of informal pre-consultation discussion with a range of key stakeholders, the Scottish Government met with the Law Society of Scotland on 5 March 2010 to discuss the recommendations for reform of the law relating to damages for personal injury contained in 3 separate Scottish Law Commission reports, one of which related directly to time bar in connection with personal injury actions. A consultation paper on the recommendations in the 3 reports will be published later this month, and we anticipate that dialogue with the Law Society will continue after publication.
Bill Patterson.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? One of the anomalies in cases where someone has inadvertently caused themselves to be affected by time bar is due to them being of a young age at the time of the crime. Can I ask this, what step? Sorry, could I? Can I just say? But later, as they mature, make charges, but then perhaps because of reliving the trauma and not yet strong enough for the ordeal, eventually withdraw. Can I ask what steps are the Scottish Government looking at to ensure that justice can be found for these people, in particular for those victims of sexual crime at a young age?
Minister.
I am conscious of the issue arising around time bar as it relates to child victims, really child victims of any crime, and I can reassure the member that the consultation that I talked about will invite views on the issue of time bar as well as other matters, and we want to fully consider those responses before bringing forward any legislation. As the member will know, it is quite a complex matter, and interest groups will have the opportunity to contribute further at a series of events we intend to hold during the consultation period.
Thank you. We now move to questions on rural affairs and the environment. Question number 1, Dave Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its estimate is of the value of aquaculture to the economy and the Highland economy in particular.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The Scottish aquaculture industry is a very important contributor to Scotland's economy. In 2011, Scottish aquaculture production amounted to 170,000 tonnes, with an estimated farm gate value of over £600 million, employing around 1,800 full and part-time staff across salmon, including ova and smolt production, shellfish cultivation and the cultivation of trout and other finfish species. Many companies now operate hatcheries, farms and processing facilities located across Scotland. Some 75% of aquaculture production is generated in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, with around 1,300 full-time and part-time jobs within that industry located in the region. And many communities now depend to a significant extent on the employment, investment and revenue that the aquaculture industry provides.
Dave Thompson.
I thank the Minister for his answer. Aquaculture does, as he says, bring considerable benefits to my own constituency, directly through local jobs and indirectly in the supply chain for things like hardware and feed. Does he agree that whilst environmental concerns must be addressed, it is regrettable that extreme forms of environmentalism detract from genuine objections from local communities, and that we must balance the preservation of the environment with the real benefits that these developments bring to remote and rural communities?
Minister.
I would certainly agree with that position. I think it's worth remembering a regulatory framework is already in place and working well, and that we clearly have a very successful aquaculture industry. However, the purpose of the bill is to take us to the next stage to ensure that going forward we continue to have an effective and proportionate regulatory framework in place which facilitates sustainable growth, while also taking into account the needs and concerns of all those who make use of Scotland's marine environment.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Taking on board the points made by the previous member, by Dave Thompson, I would still like to ask the Minister if he can clarify what sustainable development assessment, bearing in mind the sustainable development does take into account economy, environment and social issues, was undertaken in the shaping of the Aquaculture and Fisheries Bill. Minister.
Clearly, the bill is underpinned by a good understanding of the science involved with the aquaculture sector, and I'm sure the member who's well informed in these matters will be aware about the importance of looking at the biomass, the ability of each catchment to sustain biomass in aquaculture production, and certainly through I think I gave evidence to committee on what work SEPA is doing in terms of its auto depot mod software to facilitate a greater understanding for whenever a planning application comes forward and looking at the sustainable growth of the sector going forward, when planning applications do come forward for additional biomass within a certain location, to understand exactly what can be sustained at a local level and what constitutes sustainable development in that respect.
Question 2, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will meet the remaining annual emissions targets set out in the Climate Change Annual Target Scotland Order 2010.
Minister.
The Scottish Government is committed to meeting our climate change targets, and the Climate Change Annual Targets Scotland Order 2010 sets a series of binding successive annual targets to 2022. Our first climate change report and proposals and policies, Low Carbon Scotland, Meeting the Emissions Reduction Targets 2010 to 22, or RPP1, set out the delivery framework for meeting the targets to 2022 and remains current. As the member will be aware, the Scottish Government's approach to addressing our greenhouse gas emission targets and the setting of our annual targets is informed by the work of the Committee on Climate Change. We remain on course to meet those targets set on advice from the Committee on Climate Change for the period to 2022. We are also working to ensure that the measures taken to reach the targets are as robust as possible in the forthcoming RPP2 to be presented to Parliament early in the new year.
Sarah Boyle.
I understand that even the Scottish Government admit that there is a gap between the emission reductions as a result of current policy objectives and meeting our future targets. So will the new RPP mentioned by the Minister include the policies in devolved areas that the UK Climate Change Committee believe need to be rolled out, such as demand-side transport management, agriculture and land use?
Minister.
The member is correct to set out that this is an extremely challenging set of targets. I think it's worth the whole Parliament remembering that these are the most challenging and ambitious targets anywhere in Europe at this time, and that this is difficult stuff to do. Having said that, the analysis that the member is referring to, where there have been sort of coverage in the media, is looking at going beyond what the Climate Change Committee has recommended. So we are actually, in terms of the efforts we're taking in Scotland, we're providing more rigour, more analysis and more up-to-date, I would say, in terms of the understanding of the baseline position, the measures needed to take us down to a position where we meet our annual targets. And I would hope that members across the Chamber will recognise the seriousness of the challenge we face globally, the ambition that this Parliament as a whole has taken, this Government is pursuing, and also recognise that it's a difficult challenge to do, but we will be presenting in the RPP2, the points you referred to latterly, our proposals to meet those more ambitious targets.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. It's not at all challenging to set a target, it's challenging to meet the target. Given the failure to meet the first target, the Government is required to revise the RPP to show what additional action will be undertaken to make up the lost ground. By how much does the Government believe it needs to overachieve on the Year 2 target in order to make up that lost ground?
Minister.
We're looking at a situation where we are focused as a Government on the trajectory. I made the point in my ministerial statement on the subject of missing the target, that we are focused on the long-term trajectory, and we will have fluctuations both above and below targets on an annual basis. I suspect that that will be the pattern going forward. And I know the member has a strong interest in the cumulative emissions. I do accept that is a robust point that he has made on many occasions. But I would ask him to focus on the trajectory. We do believe we are on trajectory to meet our longer-term targets, and that in respect of the link he has made between the missing of the target in 2010 and the implication for RPP2, those are two distinct things. The missing of the target, we've obviously got measures we're putting in place to try and ensure we have enough contingency in place to ensure we can meet our annual targets. At the same time, RPP2 is looking at the period 2023 to 2027, and that has involved some hard work, hard graft, to look at what exactly is required to bring us into our targets in the longer term.
Question 3, Mary Scanlon.
To ask the Scottish Executive when it last met representatives of NFU Scotland and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, on behalf of the Scottish Government, can I say that I regularly meet representatives of NFU Scotland to discuss a range of important issues affecting the farming sector in Scotland. Indeed, only last week I met with a number of their senior representatives whilst visiting a farm at Longnidry to see first-hand the extent of the impact of the recent bad weather.
Mary Scanlon.
Well, I'm also aware that the Cabinet Secretary met with the Henry family at Western Manbean Farm near Elgin this week to look at their organic dairy herd. Can I ask what further help the Scottish Government can and will provide to dairy farmers in Moray and the Highlands and Islands to ensure there is a future for milk production in the north of Scotland, given that the number of producers in these areas is now at an all-time low?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, she's right. I did not meet the NFU, but I did meet some local farmers in my constituency earlier this week, and it was a fascinating insight to the success of our organic dairy farm in Moray. And I was very pleased to hear that
demand actually outstrips supply at the moment for organic milk, which is a rather healthy sign and hopefully will be an indication of things to come for demand for dairy products, particularly in the organic sector for Scotland. But what we're doing to have a sustainable dairy sector in Scotland is we're undertaking a review at the moment, which is being led by James Withers, the Chief Executive of Scotland Food and Drink. And that's going to look at how we can make more of the Scottish brand for dairy products and capture also some of the more exciting export opportunities, particularly in Asia and other markets, all of which could add significant value to dairy production in Scotland, offer new economic opportunities and hopefully give dairy producers confidence for the future.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. In reference to the Rent Review Working Group's report that was published earlier this week, if the voluntary recommendations on guidance, codes and data collection are not taken up widely across the industry, is the Scottish Government prepared to legislate to make them mandatory? And does he not agree there is a strong case for a rent register to be mandatory from the outset?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's an important issue that Claire Baker raises, and we've said all along that we would listen to the views of the Tenant Farming Forum, who are currently considering the report that's just been passed to them on rent reviews that the member refers to. So clearly I have to keep an open mind until I hear back from the Tenant Farming Forum, which is a cross-industry representative body, on their views on how that report should be implemented. So the comfort perhaps I can give the member, if she does favour mandatory action in terms of legislation, is that I have an open mind at this stage.
Fiona MacLeod.
Presiding Officer, could I ask the Cabinet Secretary in these discussions with the NFUS if they've ever talked about research on Neospora caninum from dog feces that cause neosporosis in cattle?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have to say that I can't recall such a conversation in recent times, but I'm aware it's an important issue and the impact of dog fouling on agricultural land. The current legislation does not prevent that happening on agricultural land, but the Outdoor Access Code, from memory, is where dog owners are asked to be responsible when visiting agricultural or rural land. And of course, we hope that they take that on board. But I'd be happy to look into the issue raised by the member, because I confess a limited knowledge on that particular issue, so that I can understand it better and see if there is a need for research.
Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the Minister's discussion, the Cabinet Secretary's discussions with the NFU, would he take up the matter of the inspection regime and penalties that apply under the IACS system? Is he able to give Parliament any understanding at this time in the agricultural year as to how many farms and crofts at the moment are currently being assessed for potential penalties under that regime, given the intense financial burden that can place on farms and crofts?
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, that's a really important issue raised by Tavish Scott in relation to agriculture. I know his constituents have very strong views on the sledgehammer to crack a nut approach adopted by the European authorities in terms of the common agricultural policy. This is an issue we've raised during the ongoing negotiations, and as I think I've indicated previously to the Chamber, I'm unable to give any comfort to the Chamber at the moment that Europe recognises that the approach taken is wholly disproportionate and is or could be interpreted as a disincentive to actually produce agricultural products. So it should be addressed as part of the ongoing negotiations. We're still pushing for that. The Scottish Government, hopefully with the support of the UK Government as well. In terms of the level of penalties, all I can do at this stage is refer to last year, where the level of penalties in relation to sheepy ID, for instance, was a lot less than people were anticipating. And we've worked very closely with the sheep sector, but other sectors as well, to ensure that we can be proportionate as far as the Scottish Government is concerned. We have to adhere to European regulations, but we can do what we can to be proportionate, and will continue to adopt that attitude.
Question number 4, Alex Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it will take to assist farmers who continue to be affected by extremely wet soil conditions.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I saw at first hand the difficulties facing farmers and producers due to the adverse weather conditions when visiting a farm in East Lothian last week, and previously during a separate visit back in September. I have been working closely with farming stakeholders to identify ways to support those affected, and have taken steps to ensure support payments, for instance, are made even quicker than last year, and to allow more farmers, for instance, to have more time to complete their capital works under some of our grant schemes. In the opening of the payment window, we settled around 78% of all single farm payment claims. That's up 7% from last year's achievement, resulting in £370 million of immediate support to around 16,200 farmers. I have to say that's down to the really dedicated hard work of the agricultural staff in our offices across Scotland who have been working overtime and at weekends at a time when European regulations have asked for more inspections to be carried out before payments can be made. I think that really is a sign of their professionalism and dedication that they've actually broken last year's record to help the cash flow situation of farms in Scotland.
Alex Johnson.
Not for the first time, Presiding Officer, a question has been submitted and then overtaken by events, and I note that last week the Minister made several announcements relating to the spreading of slurry, including within nitrate vulnerable zones. However, having read the Minister's statement to the press, I note that he says that staff have been able to work with farmers to avoid or reduce penalties, and that of the small number of farmers who have contacted us so far, most have been able to avoid penalties completely. I worry that while reduced penalties and most have avoided it, this doesn't indicate that all farmers are being able to avoid penalties. Can the Minister give more information and tell me what farmers need to do to avoid penalties in these extremely difficult times?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I am working closely with officials to make sure that we can help and support farmers affected by the weather, those within natural vulnerable zones and those out with the NVZs as well, obviously. In terms of the level of penalties, I think the fact that of those farmers who have contacted, the vast majority have been able to avoid penalties shows that we are taking a constructive approach. I hope the member is not suggesting that under no circumstances should there be penalties due to the bad weather happening. In other words, if there's no relation to the bad weather, clearly we can't take a policy of no penalties whatsoever. We have a regulated regime that has to be adhered to. But we are doing our best to be proportionate and reasonable, and I will certainly keep an eye on this, and I'm happy to keep Parliament up to date with the level of penalties.
Question 5, George Adam.
To ask the Scottish Government what the environmental benefits will be for Scotland of the Green Investment Bank.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The UK Green Investment Bank is the world's first investment bank solely dedicated to greening the economy, and the bank is designed to provide financial solutions to accelerate private sector investment in the green economy by addressing market failures affecting green infrastructure projects that are needed to help us achieve transition to a low-carbon economy. The UK Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Bill, which is currently progressing through the UK Parliament, will enshrine the bank's green purposes in statute. The Scottish Parliament passed a legislative consent motion on 18th September 2012 agreeing to those green purposes. Funding support from the bank could provide a wide range of environmental benefits through investments made in Scotland. The Scottish Government is working closely with the UK Green Investment Bank to help secure that investment for Scotland. The Chief Executive of the bank has promised to put together a holistic set of measures of the bank's performance, and I would expect the UK Green Investment Bank in due course to report on the environmental benefits of its activities.
George Adam.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer? Last week's Scottish Renewables report showed that investment in clean, green energy is set to break the £1 billion mark this year. Can the Minister assure me that the Scottish Government will continue to give the industry the certainty it needs to continue this unprecedented investment, rather than the infighting and uncertainty generated by the Condemn coalition?
Minister.
Yes, our policy of aiming to provide the equivalent of 100% of Scotland's electricity consumption from renewable sources by 2020 has provided such certainty, and we've recently committed to achieving a new interim target of 50% by 2015 on the way to that target. This year has also seen us launch Scotland's Renewable Energy Investment Fund, capitalised with £103 million of Scotland's fossil fuel levy monies that were returned to Scotland. With an initial focus on marine, district heating and community renewables, it is deliberately complementary to funding offered by the Green Investment Bank that the remaining £103 million of Scotland's fossil fuel levy help to capitalise.
Question number 6, Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions they have had with the Forestry Commission Scotland and the NFU about tree planting in prime arable land.
Cabinet Secretary.
Our Woodland Expansion Advisory Group included representatives of Forestry Commission Scotland and NFU Scotland, as well as others representing farming, forestry, conservation and communities. The group recommended that the focus of woodland expansion should be away from prime agricultural land, but it should be recognised that there are important opportunities for small-scale tree planting, for example in field margins, along watercourses, or to improve the environment in and around towns. So we have accepted this together with all the other recommendations from the group.
Dennis Robertson.
The Cabinet Secretary is probably aware that in my own constituency, farmers are very concerned that tree planting is happening in prime arable land. And I'm just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary can perhaps look into this in more detail, as it would also prevent new entrants from entering into farming, which is essential for our continued growth in the farming sector.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I have recognised for some time this is a concern of farmers across Scotland, and that's indeed why we set up the group in the first place, and now we have decided to accept their recommendations. It is worthwhile putting this issue into some context. Since 2006, Forestry Commission Scotland has purchased 44 farms, about 10,000 hectares, and at the time of the announcement just a few weeks ago, we were committed to buying a further 6 farms in Scotland. So that's a total of about 50 farms, which is small in relation to Scotland's 25,000 farms. And so far, tree planting is complete or underway in accordance with the agreed plans on 19 of those farms, only 19 at the moment. So whilst I do recognise this is a very important issue for many farmers, as it is for the Scottish Government, I'm confident that we have a way forward, and that's why the advisory group has pointed to ways in which Mr Robertson's constituents can be much better consulted by the Forestry Commission, and will be in the future, through local reference groups being established, including farmers from each region. There's also revised guidance for staff in undertaking consultations and community engagement in relation to land use on farms as acquired. And of course, we have actually started within Forestry Commission Scotland new starter farms. So hopefully, as far as the future is concerned, the Forestry Commission will be creating new starter farms as opposed to stopping new entrants getting into agriculture.
Ms Graham.
I'm not often called in rural development questions. I don't know if this is usual, and I'm certainly not challenging or criticising yourself in the chair, but we've only reached number 6. It appears this is very technical questions with long technical answers. Would it be possible to give consideration to fewer questions being put down on the business bulletin for rural development, as we've only reached 6 and 4 haven't had a chance?
If you had just waited 30 seconds, Ms Graham, you might have heard what I'm going to say now, and that is, I do think that it's disappointing that we have only reached question 6 in rural affairs and development questions. And can I ask people to reflect on the length of both the questions and the Cabinet Secretary and Ministers about the length of the answers, and then perhaps next time we can make far more progress than we've made today. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 5172 in the name of Richard Lochhead on the annual EU fisheries negotiations. Members who wish